So we're in chapter 10, and we've been talking about the Tzadik. That's what we're trying to understand, what a Tzadik is, and realizing that a Tzadik is not just somebody who is a good person, somebody who's nice, somebody who's us with some minor modifications. That's not actually what a Tzadik is. So the question is, what is a Tzadik? That's really the question, right? So we started to talk about the fact that there are two kinds of Tzadik. There's the perfect Tzadik, the imperfect Tzadik, what's called the Tzadik Gomor. That means complete Tzadik. Tzadik she'einoi Gomor, that's the Tzadik that is not complete. We spoke about the possibility of a Tzadik v'tov lo, a Tzadik that life is good for them, and as of last week we kind of modified what that meant. Tzadik v'ra lo, Tzadik that life is bad for them, we also modified originally what that meant. So effectively what we know so far is that the definition of a Tzadik is somebody who has completely, and the word completely is a big word, has completely removed any negative influence from their character, any toxic energy from their personality. That's the definition of a tzaddik. So the tzaddik is not defined by what they do or don't do. Tzaddik is not somebody who's doing all the right things and avoiding the wrong things. A tzaddik is not somebody who is winning the battle. A tzaddik is somebody who has won the battle. But what it means to win the battle is completely different if we're dealing with the so-called complete tzaddik or the so-called incomplete tzaddik. And that's really where we're up to. So if you have the book, we're on page 42. Where exactly? Good question. Right at the top, actually, on page 42. Right at the top, so it's the second last word of the second line. That's basically where we are in the book. I'm going to stick it up on the screen in a second for those of you who are online, so that you can see it on the screen in front of you. There you go. Same principle, which is that it is actually, let's go back. Yeah, okay. So it's exactly where we are. Here's the fourth line. Okay, so if you're looking on the screen, it is the fourth line. Now, what do we learn so far? We spoke a lot about the difference between living in a city where all the criminals are locked up versus another alternative, which we haven't really completely unpacked. So we spoke about the possibility of living in a place where there is absolute law and order, and the reason that there's absolute law and order is because all the criminals are locked up, which is great for us. It's wonderful. It means we're living in an environment that's very healthy, that feels very safe, and we feel like we've won the war against crime. And we have. We've won the war against crime. What we have not done is we haven't succeeded in terms of criminals, because the criminals still exist. They just happen to be behind bars. So practically, they're not coming into our streets. They're not coming into our homes, which is a really good thing. But the fact is, the criminals still exist. That is the metaphor for the so-called imperfect tzaddik, the tzaddik ve'ra-loi. This is a person who's a tzaddik. Why are they a tzaddik? Because ra-loi, whatever was criminal in their world, is loi, is under their complete control, under their complete jurisdiction. So for us, if we were to meet this person, we would be looking at a person who does not experience the temptations that we experience, who does not experience the challenges spiritually that we experience. So we, for example, I speak for myself, obviously don't want to cast aspersions at anybody else in the room or in the virtual room, that, the alarm goes off in the morning. You know what happens when the alarm goes off in the morning? There's a whole battle that erupts, an internal battle. And depending which side of the equator you are right now, because I know that some people are in the northern side of the equator, you have the kind of weather outside your window that says, why on earth should I be getting up right now? My job only starts at whatever particular time. I don't actually have to get up right now. And then there's another side of us that says, well, you need to get up because you've got to daven, you've got to go to shul, or even just daven at home, or do some learning, do your spiritual development techniques, your meditation, whatever the case is. So there's that battle. The tzaddik, including the imperfect tzaddik, does not have that problem. There is no criminal on his block. There's no voice of distraction, of temptation. There's no 5 more minutes. Doesn't exist. They're behind bars. Those forces that are so much part of our personal micro society just doesn't exist for that tzaddik. Just not there. And again, there's so many different examples of the same thing. So you and I might be sitting in a social setting and a story crosses our mind about somebody else who might or might not be in our social circle, and we'd like to share the story. And then we're debating internally, should I share it? Should I not share it? Is it Lashon Hara? Is it not Lashon Hara? It's like a whole debate. And then we come up with these rationalizations. Well, perhaps it's a negative story about the person, but it is important for me to share it because I have to let other people know what they should or shouldn't be doing, or who they should avoid, or who not to go into business with, etc. So, we have this whole analysis, this internal analysis. Tzadik doesn't have that problem. There's no criminals on the block. There is nobody to voice the suggestion that it might be a good idea to speak negatively about somebody else. So, as we learned last week, the so-called imperfect tzaddik lives with the illusion, it's not a delusion, but the illusion that they are as good as can be, because look, there are no criminals in this society. There are no temptations, there are no distractions, there is no laziness, there is no vice. Amazing, right? So that's where we ended off last week, by starting to explore what's missing. The perfect tzaddik experiences an element of disgust, of anger, of hatred towards those things that are criminal. And we've got to be really careful about this, really careful how we understand this, because there's the kind of hatred of something, and hatred is generally not a positive trait. Yes, I think we can all agree with. Right? Generally speaking, you don't encourage people to experience hatred. And you don't generally encourage people to live with a sense of disgust. But sometimes you want people to. Let's say, for argument's sake, a person who's an oncologist. You want them to hate the tumor. You want them to be disgusted by the tumor. You don't want them to be intrigued by it. If they're a researcher, they can afford to be intrigued by the tumor. But if their job is to get it out of the system, then they have to have this absolute intolerance for the existence of the tumor. That's the kind of oncologist you want. Somebody who's like, they're not going to be satisfied until they know that they've rooted out every last nanofiber of what was a tumor. But then there's another layer, because that's the sort of hatred / intolerance that leads somebody to want to destroy. And destruction also isn't a positive thing, right? Even though it's necessary. Sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes you got to cut off the head of the snake, as the expression goes. It's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it. Doesn't make it a good thing. Sometimes a person has to cut off a part of a human being's body in order to save the body. It doesn't make it a good thing. I mean, it has a good result. It's for a good purpose. It's not something you want to do. It's not something we volunteer for. It's something that, when there are no options, that's what we've got to do. The tzaddik gomer is not a surgeon or a special forces soldier who's going to go take out the head of a terror organization. The tzaddik gomer's intolerance is a different kind of intolerance. So let's try and use an example that we could possibly relate to. Now, different people obviously have different experiences, different outlooks, different expectations. So this is not meant in any way to judge any individual. But let's just use an example, right? Some people can tolerate dirt. It's just how they are. You walk into their house and you can see that these are people who can tolerate dirt. They can tolerate schmutz. They can tolerate mess. So you walk in and the place looks like it could really do with a little bit of a makeover. There are things lying all over the place. They can tolerate it. Some people cannot handle dirt. And I'm not talking necessarily about germophobes. But some people just can't handle the concept of being in an environment that is schmutzig. That's a dirty environment. So what do they do when they walk into a place that's dirty? Let's say that this person goes away for a week from home, and when they come back, so they lock up the house and they're going on a vacation or whatever it is they're doing, they come back. And you all know that experience. You come back into a house that's been completely locked up for a period of time, and you open up, it's like, it's a bit muggy, a bit musty. There's possibly a layer of dust that's developed. So the person who can tolerate mess walks in and says, meh, okay, whatever, we'll get to it. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe I'll deal with it tomorrow. The person who cannot tolerate dirt is not going to sit there screaming and shouting and crying their eyes out. This is so terrible. I can't believe this happened to me. I go away for a vacation, and this is what I return to, and the house is a mess. Woe is to me. Never, poor me. How could this happen? What is the person who cannot tolerate dirt? What do? They roll up their sleeves, and they clean. That's a healthy intolerance. A healthy intolerance means that because I can't handle how things are, it compels me to change them for the better. Because it irks me so deeply, I can't handle it. So you might remember, we all had different kinds of teachers at school, yes? So you get the kind of teacher who walks into the classroom and you know from the minute they cross the threshold that this year is going to be open season. You just know that. They're going to walk through the door and that's it. You'll be able to do whatever you please with that teacher. I remember we once had a teacher that we told her on the first day, we said, we're a very bright class and you need to wear sunglasses when you come to school. So I don't know if she did it to humor us or not, but the next day she came in sunglasses. So some teachers, you're just going to ride roughshod over them, and there's not going to be much detail, right? Oh, there we go. I didn't see this in the chat. So we have some of the cleaners in the group, right? We have some of the cleaners in the group. So then you get other teachers, which is probably the vast majority of teachers. They come along. There's an expectation. There's a syllabus. This is what we're going to do. This is the material that we're going to cover. This is how the test is going to work. This is how you're going to be graded on your test. This is what will constitute a pass, that, etc., etc. And they run the class in a pretty decent way. They get results. There'll always be the fringe element of students who get nothing out of the class. And the teacher says it doesn't matter who you put that there, whoever teaches them, it's going to be the same result. And then you get the teacher that drives the class crazy. Person walks in, and from day one, they're hucking you a chinik, they're driving you crazy, they're pushing you to do things that you don't want to do, that you don't believe in doing. Here's the kid who spent the last 5 years of school scraping through with like a 51%, and now this teacher is giving them a hard time. I'm not accepting that. In my class, that's a fail. And they drive them absolutely insane. What's with this teacher? There's a period of time where the students hate this teacher completely. But there's also a period of time down the line where they love this teacher. Because the teacher's shifted them to a place that they never believed they could go. Because this is a teacher who couldn't tolerate mediocrity. If a person is not capable, that's a different story. But if a person is mediocre, if a person is just sailing through because they don't want to have to put in too much effort and life is good, why do I have to work so hard? This teacher can't tolerate that. It disgusts them. It irks them to the core of their being. So they don't march that kid out of class to the principal's office every 5 minutes, because then they'll be just as frustrated as they were. This teacher cannot rest until they make that shift from mediocrity to success. And it might not be a teacher, it might be an employer, it could be your personal trainer at the gym. All of these people get change, they get results because they are unwilling to tolerate the thing as it is. So their objective is not, this teacher is not going to weed out the students that are mediocre so that I could have, this good resume of all these people who get straight A's. That would be an imperfect Tzadik. The imperfect Tzadik says, go to the B class, don't be in my class. I don't want any of this toxic energy in my life. I'm going to be a Tzadik. It's going to be a wholesome, healthy, spiritually oriented, holy experience of life. Anything that does not fit with this particular ideal doesn't belong here. But the perfect Tzadik says, you're in my class, get with the program. Get on board. I can't handle living in an environment where the bad guys are locked up or are in detention or get fired from their jobs. I can't live with that. We've got to make the so-called bad guys into good guys. These are those teachers who go into the inner city schools. These are those teachers who take the kids with learning difficulties and make miracles with them. These are the change agents that come into an environment and say, we cannot tolerate a society that's like this or a business that's like this. These are the extreme makeover people. So the tzaddik is doing that in spiritual terms because, as we learned last week, you cannot be a tzaddik in isolation. It's not possible to be a tzaddik if the world around you has criminals locked away. So then what's the achievement? So I'm a tzaddik, living on my little island in a world that's not aligned with what it should be. So let's have a look inside. So like I said, the second last word on page 42 if you have the book. And on the screen it's the fourth line on the page. Again, also the second last word. So just to put it into context, last week we learned that the objective of the tzaddik, the perfect tzaddik, is to strip away the so-called soiled garments that attach to the neshama by engaging in the pleasures of this world. You know what? Let's actually back up a little bit just to get context. So let's just back up a little bit. That means if you're in the book, you're going to go to the previous page, the last line, and if you're on the screen, you're going to go to the top line, the second last word. Dahainu, what does it mean to strip away these soiled garments? Lim'ois me'oid beta'anugei olam hazeh. That the tzaddik gomer is somebody who finds it absolutely abhorrent that a person should live for material pleasures. Now let's be clear about this. The tzaddik gomer does not have an issue with a person who enjoys material pleasures. The tzaddik gomer is disgusted by the thought of believing that life is about enjoying material pleasures. Okay? So the tzaddik is disgusted by people who reduce the value of this world just to hedonism. That disgusts him. This is God's world. Yes, of course there's a layer of physical pleasure. Yes, of course Hashem created things that generate a sense of feeling good. But don't relegate Hashem's world to the little bit of human pleasure that I'm able to extract out of it. That's disgusting. So what does that mean? Let's continue the line. What the tzaddik finds to be objectionable is people who take benefit out of this world just to satisfy themselves. Just to feed the needs and desires of the body alone, and not to serve Hashem. So let's just talk about this for a second. Let's use a couple of examples that might kind of illustrate the point. What do you think it would feel like if a person was working in your business and you're really passionate about your business? You care about your business. You've invested in your business. You've grown it from the ground up. It's literally the pride and joy of your career. And then you discover that there's somebody who is in your business and all they care about is their paycheck. Isn't that offensive? It's offensive, right? Look, I don't expect you to love the business with the same love that I have for the business, because it's my business. I'm the entrepreneur, I built it, whatever the case is. But some passion, some care, some emotion, some attachment, some loyalty, something. We discover that all that person cares about is the paycheck. They couldn't care about the customer, they couldn't care about the product, they couldn't care about the ethos of the business. It's offensive. It is offensive. Let's go a step further than that to make this even more offensive. What would happen, and unfortunately it's terribly sad, but sometimes this does happen. What would happen if a child would inform a parent, however they do so, either directly or indirectly, inform a parent, you're only good for your money. Can you imagine what that does to a parent? And this is not even far-fetched. It's the kind of thing that happens, especially in our highly entitled society. You're only good for what you give me. So if you're not giving me what I want, you have no value. A balanced human being should find that disgusting. That's a disgusting attitude. That's how you look at a parent. That the only value that a parent has is that they put money in your account. The only value that a parent has is they drive you to point X or to point B or whatever the case is. That's the value of a parent. Okay? I'm not going to get into, you want to sit on the couch. I'll refer you to some people. You can go sit on the couch and you can debate whether it's the parents' fault or not. That's how the kids landed up. But it should get us in the gut. Oh my gosh, that is shocking that a parent should feel that way. The child should feel that way about a parent. Or the reverse. Unfortunately, we know that this exists, that you have parents who the value of their child is pegged on certain achievements. So if they have two children, and the one is the great, valedictorian and the big athlete and the business success or whatever the case is, that child gets all the love. And the other child who doesn't perform it doesn't get the love. Now, I'm not saying these things don't happen. Of course they happen. But they should be objectionable. Parental love should be unconditional. Can you imagine? Can you imagine the parent who turns around to the child and says, "You have failed me because..." It happens. These things happen commonly. But that's not the attitude a parent should take to a child. A parent could say to the child, "You're not living up to your potential. You've disappointed, but you failed me. I no longer can share the same love with you because..." That's a problem. These things should be objectionable to us. And perhaps the worst scenario, and this is a very extreme scenario, is when there's infidelity in a marriage. And it emerges that basically what's happened is that the one partner has reduced relationship to physical attraction. Now, marriage is this incredible investment of all elements of the human experience. There's an emotional attachment, which is a key part of the marriage. There's this sharing of ideas. There's this intellectual journey that two people go on in terms of their dreams, their aspirations, their values, how they want to build a family, etc. A person who ditches all of that because they found somebody who looks physically attractive should be disgusting. We should feel, this is not a judgment. We're not judging the person. But the ability to give up on the true value of something in favor of something valueless should disgust us, should make us sick to our stomach when we hear such a story. That's how a Tzadik feels when he sees us eating lunch. The Tzadik says, "Do you understand where you are? Do you understand where you live? This is God's world. This is a place within the realm of the human experience where Hashem has made opportunity after opportunity for us to be able to key into His infinite self. And all we could do is say that there wasn't enough flavor in the sandwich. That's the best we could come up with. That's why He sent your neshama down. This is going through the Tzadik said. That's why He sent your neshama down into this world, so you could have another hot dog. So you could sit there, having this whole conversation about the difference between this single malt and that blend, and this one's peaty, and that one's smoky, and this one's got a bit of a sweet, whatever. That's why He sent your neshama into this world. The Tzaddik's mind blown. He's completely gobsmacked. Like, he's again, he's not judging the person because he's a Tzadik. Tzadik doesn't have the temptation to apply a judgment to a person's behavior. But the objective, sterile assessment of that behavior is it's disgusting. It's sick. How could a person behave like that? So he's incredibly disgusted by the pleasures of this world when they are nothing more than transient, hedonistic, human pleasures. And the next three words are critical. Veloi la'avodas Hashem, where it is devoid of any sense of serving Hashem. So let's have a look at what the Tzaddik's expectation is versus what we actually do, which is, so to speak, objectionable. So what's the Tzaddik's expectation? So you sit down to have lunch. Is it a problem to have lunch? Just going to make sure we don't create any major issues over here for people. So is there a problem in Judaism to have lunch? Of course not. Have you ever seen Jews and food? You'll know. That's clearly not our tradition to have an issue with eating lunch or supper or something in between. But we could look at the experience of eating lunch as a potential connection point. Eating lunch is part of how I develop my relationship with Hashem. That's what he's calling over here, service of Hashem. Part of how I develop that relationship. Or eating lunch could simply be making me feel good. So that's the distinguishing factor. The tzaddik is so frustrated at the fact that there are so many people squandering so many opportunities, and it's not even necessarily their fault. Again, so he's not angry at the people. He's not judging the people. He's just disgusted that that's the world that we live in. And like the person who is compelled to clean the house, the tzaddik wants to clean the world. Tzaddik doesn't want to sit there and skinner behind your back with some other tzaddik about those people who eat lunch. About those people who think every time that they're preparing supper that they're on a season of MasterChef. He's not speaking about behind our backs and say, he's like, how do we change this? We've got to change this. We've got to sensitize people. We've got to change the world. We've got to clean up the room. So what is it that bothers the tzaddik so badly? Again, it's not the issue. The tzaddik doesn't have an issue with us. In fact, to the contrary, and I think this is one of the most amazing things that you'll always find when you engage with people who are truly spiritually developed. You will always find that they have this incredible tolerance of people, even when they have absolutely no tolerance of behavior. So it's a fascinating paradox. So the people who sound the most radical in terms of their views and in terms of how things are supposed to be and in terms of what the world should be, if they are true tzaddikim, if they're truly pious, developed individuals, that does not translate into any kind of animosity, any kind of personal attack, because they have this love. They're a tzaddik, they're pure people. They have an absolute love for people. Absolute love for Hashem's creations. Whether those people are Jewish people, whether the people are not Jewish people, it doesn't make a difference. They have this incredible love and compassion and care for people. I'll give you a really interesting example that might illustrate the point. Would a tzaddik support war? And this is a difficult question to answer, and I'll tell you why it's a difficult question. Because the Torah supports war in certain circumstances. So the most noble kind of war that can exist is the war to protect yourself or your people from being, God forbid, killed. That is a moral war. In fact, it's immoral not to do so. Right? So does the Torah support war? Yes, absolutely. Certain types of war, certain circumstances, absolutely. So the fact that the Torah supports war, does that mean then that a tzaddik would be somebody who encourages war? It's a fascinating topic, right? And let me explain. I'll come from a slightly different angle just for a second, just to illustrate the point. Is there a mitzvah in the Torah to get divorced? One of the 613 mitzvahs in the Torah is to get divorced. 100%. Does that mean you should get divorced? Does that mean that people should get divorced? Should we start a campaign to say, listen, you've only fulfilled 612 of the mitzvahs. We need you to do mitzvah 613. Please get divorced? Obviously not. Because the mitzvah of divorce is only relevant if, God forbid, the situation requires it. Then it becomes a mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah that you put onto your bucket list. One day, please God. No, you don't speak like that. You say, God forbid. And the Gemara tells us that the first time that a couple's first divorce, Just in itself a crazy thought, that suggesting the possibility of more than one divorce. But it says when a couple divorces for the first time, it says the Mizbeach, the altar, cries. Because it's such a jarring, shocking, terrible thing. And yet it's a mitzvah in the Torah. So, if a couple is at the point that they should get divorced, will the tzaddik assist them? Will the tzaddik support them? Absolutely. But what would he do until that point? Everything in his power to make sure they don't get divorced. If there's any chance, of course, bearing in mind that it's appropriate to save the marriage. I'm not talking over here about abuse. I'm not talking about infidelity. If there's any chance of saving that marriage, the tzaddik will invest every bit of resource that he has to save the marriage. Why? Because the tzaddik loves people. And he knows the pain of divorce. And he appreciates that even though it might be a solution under certain circumstances, it's always a painful solution, and you want to rather get a better solution. So would the tzaddik support war? If it comes to it. But the tzaddik would invest every fiber of his being in doing everything possible to avoid a war, even with our quote-unquote enemies. Because he even finds the death of our enemies objectionable. The tzaddik has a problem with anything that does not bring godliness into this world. And if you've got to go out there and destroy your enemies, that's not good enough. Then you're not bringing godliness into the world. You're just removing the obstructions. So what does the tzaddik want? What's the tzaddik's ultimate? I'm not saying that he could, he can't. But the tzaddik's ultimate is turn your enemies. That's the tzaddik's ultimate. So let's read it inside. So what's the tzaddik's problem with all this investment in hedonism or in aggression or whatever the case might be? This is a direct continuation of something we learned in chapter 6. So I want to review what we learned in chapter 6. Chapter 6, we learned that there are two potential spiritual realities. Everything that exists within two potential spiritual realities. You're either in the one reality or you are in the other reality. The one reality is called Kedusha, holiness. So the one possibility is that you live in a space of holiness. And what does it mean to live in a space of holiness? It means connection to Hashem. If a person or an item or a thing or a concept is not in the space of holiness, then it is automatically in the space of what we call klippa. Klippa is a blockage of holiness, an obstruction to holiness. Not every klippa is 100% toxic. Because we learned in chapter 7 that there's something called klippas noiga, which means it is klippa. It's not immediately apparent that it has a relationship with Hashem, but that's fairly easy to fix. Klippas noiga. So the tzaddik looks at the world and he says, here are people who are eating lunch. The food on their plate is kosher, so therefore it belongs to what we call klippas noiga. It is currently in a neutral spiritual state, and how the person is going to engage with it will either elevate it into the world it belongs to, which is the world of holiness and connection to Hashem, or we're going to mess this up, and then it's going to fall into the world of klippa, and it's going to be disconnected from Hashem. The tzaddik has no issue with what food we're eating. The tzaddik has no issue with what conversation we're having. The tzaddik has no issue with the clothes that we're wearing. The tzaddik only has one issue. He cannot tolerate things that are disconnected from Hashem. He cannot tolerate behaviors that disconnect us from Hashem. He cannot tolerate a person being in a state of disconnect. That's what he can't handle. So, anything that belongs to that world of so-called darkness, that world of the other side, the world that is in opposition to holiness, the world that is blocked from holiness, that is what the Tzadik Gomer just cannot handle. He uses harsh words over here. He hates it with the most extreme hate. Hate is a strong word, hey? It's a very strong word. anything which is klippa, anything which is sitra achra, in other words, anything which is in opposition to God, the tzaddik can't stand it. Now, if that sounds radical, let's test this for a moment. Let's think. Can you handle, let's say you're walking down the street and somebody says something that is insulting. It's not necessarily the worst discriminatory term, whatever, but somebody says something that is insulting to another person who's either in the same shop that you're in, or walking on the street, or driving their car, or whatever. This person says something insulting to them. Can you handle it? I don't know. I'm sure it depends on who you are. Some people can. Some people look at them like, what are you doing? Some people get involved, right? They take up the cause of the underdog, and so they get involved, and hey, you shouldn't be talking like that. And they kind of settle and they move on. What would happen if the person said that insulting thing to your child? You're walking holding your child's hand, and some person says something that is offensive to your child. The whole mother bear thing comes out. There's a whole different reaction when it's that close and it's that personal. And the reason is because this is your child. Nobody can talk to your child. Nobody can insult your child. Nobody can hurt your child. So your reaction to that situation, to that person, to those words is going to be extreme. Right? If it's a stranger, okay, I can tolerate it. Why? Because I don't have so much skin in the game. Because if I'm not invested in something, then I'm not protective of it. If I'm not protective, then I'm not reactionary. So the more invested you are, the more harsh your reaction is going to be. The tzaddik is completely and utterly invested in God. So as protective as you feel, as attached as you feel, as loving as you feel for your child, that's at least how much the tzaddik feels towards Hashem. Anything that lives in the world of klippa, of blockage to godliness, is the worst possible concept for a tzaddik. How dare you? And it's worse. I'll tell you why it's worse. If some random stranger walking down the street has a problem, and because they have a problem, they've got anger issues, they are bigots, they're mentally unstable, and therefore they attack your child, you can say, you know what? The person has a problem. You can turn to your child and you can say, it's not your issue. But here we're talking about Hashem. Hashem gave us and gives us everything that we are, everything that we have, life itself. How can you now block Hashem out of your life? Because that's what klippa does. Klippa blocks God out of its life. That's what gets the tzaddik so worked up. Again, it's not about the person. It's not a judgment. It's like, I just don't understand how we could block out the source of life itself. It just doesn't make any sense. It can't be. We can't tolerate this. We've got to change thinking. We've got to change perspective. We've got to spin people around. In other words, the tzaddik is so invested in us. We're going to see in a moment. Well, not in a moment. We'll, please God, do it next week. But what we're going to see is that when a person has a deep, deep, deep love for something or for someone, the flip side of love is hate. Because if you do something against who I love, I can't handle you. That's the tzaddik's perspective. So that's why he says this expression, Husoin oy betachlis hasina. The tzaddik has this hatred for anything which obstructs God from the world with absolute, the most extreme form of hatred. Why? Machmas goydel ahavosoi Hashem, because of how much the tzaddik loves Hashem. So that's actually what we have to unpack, which please God will do next week. It's just to unpack, what does it mean that the tzaddik loves Hashem so deeply, so profoundly? Like, what does that look like? But it's a key element of understanding what's going on inside the perfect tzaddik's world. The perfect tzaddik is so extreme in his response because he's so invested in Hashem. So we've got to understand that a little bit better. But essentially, what we've got to walk away from tonight with is understanding that a tzaddik who is imperfect has created a perfect reality for himself, but isn't bothered by the fact that there might be imperfection in the world. So that tzaddik who is imperfect can live with the thought that there's mess in the next door room. The perfect tzaddik cannot tolerate mess. It has to be cleaned. The perfect tzaddik cannot tolerate interference with God. It has to be resolved. The perfect tzaddik cannot tolerate people who are disconnected. They have to be guided. And so basically what we're going to learn is that the perfect tzaddik can never rest. That's essentially what we're going to start to discover. The perfect tzaddik can never rest because it's personal. Because the world has to be a better place. Because the world has to be a holy place. Because Hashem has to be connected and we have to be connected. But as I say, please God, we'll continue that next week.